Congress has directed the Secretary of Defense to report on food insecurity among service members and their dependents. The Secretary's office asked the RAND Corporation to provide some research on that issue. Tom Trail is a senior behavioral scientist at RAND and contributed to the report. Tom, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
You know, it's shocking that American service members are experiencing food insecurity. Has this been a problem for a while, or is this new?
You know, there have been reports of it for quite a while, actually. Back in the 90s, that people used to talk about how there were service members on food stamps. So it's been a problem for a while, but it crops up every once in a while as a more major issue.
So how are you defining food insecure for the purposes of this report?
So the Department of Agriculture has a definition, and their formal definition is the consistent ability to access food for a healthy lifestyle. And how that's measured typically is through survey research. So survey questions and about your financial ability to access food. So, you know, have you ever bought in the past year, bought food but didn't have enough to make it through the month and couldn't afford to buy more? Have you had to skip meals because you couldn't afford to buy enough food, et cetera? The questions like that. So it's really a financial issue in the survey questions, which is what we looked at.
So how do you go about getting this data? Do you simply ask people these questions? Is it self-reporting?
It's self-reported, yes. So the data we used actually for the study were collected by the Department of Defense. They have a status of forces survey they do every 2 years of service members. They try to get a representative sample of service members, so you can say that this percentage represents the service as a whole. And so we use those data where they ask these questions on their survey.
Let's break down some of the data. You found that food insecure members were more likely to be a racial or ethnic minority.
Yes.
What would cause that?
You know, it's really hard to tell. It was really hard to tell in general what caused the food insecurity among service members, but it's pretty high. It's 26% for the force as a whole, and that's compared to 9% for civilians who we matched on similar, you know, service members tend to be male, they tend to be younger, so if you look at that same population in the civilian world, the food insecurity is about 9%, but in the military it's about 26%.
Which is really, I mean, that's a lot of people, that are saying that we don't have access to good, healthy food. You also found that it was more people, you know, a higher percentage, I should say, living on post rather than off, which seems counterintuitive. Because on post, you've got access to, you know, cafeteria or you know, you've got access.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that could be going on there, and it's an unfortunate problem with survey data is like there's only so much you can know. For example, it could be that they were on post in temporary housing while they were waiting for you know, their permanent housing, like a rental. That happens a lot. You're staying in a hotel, you accumulate a lot of expenses that you do get reimbursed for, but it takes a long time to get reimbursed for that. So you're spending your own money, you might run out of money.
Did you find that service members were using those federal food assistance programs like SNAP?
So not SNAP, no. Not very many service members use SNAP, and not very many qualify for SNAP actually, because they count your basic allowance for housing, which is what the military pays service members who live off post for their housing. So if you live on post, you know, your housing is paid for by the military, maybe in barracks or whatever. But if you live off post, they give you a basic allowance for housing. But they count that as income when they look at your qualifications for SNAP. So not very many people qualify. A lot more families, military families, used WIC. So that's a Women, Infants, and Children's program where they provide a voucher to purchase healthy food if you have a young kid. A lot more used WIC than SNAP.
And community food pantries as well.
And pantries as well, yes ma'am.
The Congress has requested an assessment of the possibility of a monthly basic needs allowance. How would that work?
So that is actually still being negotiated a little bit. So it's to raise the service members' pay up to 130% of the federal poverty level was the original goal. I understand that they've recently passed legislation to raise it up to 150% of federal poverty level. And the federal poverty level takes into account the number of people in your household, for example, and what your household income is. But the initial It all depends on whether you count that basic allowance for housing. So if you count that as income, very few people qualify. And so it's, in our report, it was around 1,000. I think in congressional, like when they actually, the Department of Defense looked at it, it was a few hundred. If you don't count basic allowance for housing as income, then it moves up into the tens of thousands of people who would qualify.
Is there a consensus as to whether or not that would help with food insecurity?
It really varies on who you talk to. So the questions that you look at are all financial questions. So you would think that providing additional income would help with that. But it sometimes depends on whether that you're dealing with like a food insecurity that is an acute incident. So, you know, you moved, you paid for your own move, you spent a lot of money out of pocket, so you ran out of money for that month, and then you got reimbursed for it later, but you didn't have enough that month. So then it may not help as much as if it's a chronic issue where you're just having difficulty paying your bills because you live in a high cost of living area, or you choose to live in a community to get a better school for your kid, for example, so you're paying more.
And just briefly, what happens next? Are you going to be making recommendations?
So it's really up to Congress now about the basic needs allowance and how that's going to be implemented and what the levels are going to be and how the Department of Defense decides to define that. We are doing additional studies to try to figure out what some of these issues are and why on post, for example, housing, people have greater food insecurity. It doesn't make a lot of sense why racial ethnic minorities have more food insecurity. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you look at pay.
All right. Well, Tom, thanks so much. Nice to talk to you.
Nice talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.